Hey, welcome to my presentation. My name is Dino Sossi. The name of my presentation is You Can Run, But You Can't Hide, the Impact of Surveillance Technology in Schools. For this presentation, I'm going to go over a long trajectory of time before I finally conclude on educational implications. Just basically the overview. First, I'll talk about Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon model for effective prisons. Secondly, Michel Foucault's Panopticon analysis across institutions. Third, George Orwell's governmental surveillance of citizens. Fourth, Walter Kern's inversion of government surveillance to self-surveillance. And finally, again, surveillance implications for education. First, again, I'll talk about Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon model for effective prisons. What is a panopticon? Just generally, it's kind of refers to two different separate entities that are also related. An institutional building, but it's also, more for the purposes of this presentation and education more generally, a system of control. It was created by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century. And if you want to break the term down, it breaks into pan and opticon, pan meaning all, opticon meaning can be observed, and the all, in this case, would be all inmates of an institution. Before that, what originally, where did the term actually come from? What's its etymology? It comes from Greek mythology. There is a giant called Panoptes who had 1,000 eyes, and he was a single watchman. So basically, Panoptes could have some of his eyes asleep and closed while others were open, so he would make a perfect watchman. More broadly, and kind of as it developed over time, what is a panopticon in terms of prisons? As you see on the diagram on the left, it's a prison, and you have two arrows, the red and the blue one. The red points to where the watchman would be in the middle of the structure, and on the blue arrow points to that letter A, and those are all individual cells. So the watchman can see the individual cells. And on the right, it's more of a practical illustration of it, where you see in the distance a watchtower, and in the foreground is a gentleman on his knees in a supplicant position. So it kind of shows the power of the watchman and the panopticon. So in terms of more broadly, what does this imply? Because of the way it's structured, where the watchman is very far away, and oftentimes the windows can be kind of narrow, the inmates cannot tell if they're being watched. So the watchman appears to observe all cells at once. And so then, because of this, the inmates act like they're always watched. And as a result, this compels them to constantly control their behavior because they know they're constantly being watched. More arrows, another more recent example. This is a penitentiary in Illinois, where the red arrow points to the watchtower in the middle, and the blue points to the periphery where all the cells are. For those of you who are more into your pop culture, this is from The Dark Knight. That's Morgan Freeman on the right. He plays Lucius Fox, where the Batman employed this sonar activation of microphones all over the city. And so the watchman, Lucius Fox or Morgan Freeman in this, would be able to see the various screens, which are denoted by the blue arrow. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about Michel Foucault's Panopticon analysis, and he broadens this across institutions, not simply just prisons. Here's a quote: "The Panopticon must not be understood as a dream building. It is a diagram of a mechanism of power reduced to its ideal form." And this is from Foucault's masterwork, Discipline and Punish. So the dream, the sort of the nightmare, not the dream, is that you have power reduced to its ideal form, the central watchman and the people being watched on the periphery. Here's a quote from Discipline and Punish. "At the center, this tower is pierced with wide windows that open onto the inner side of the ring. The peripheric building is divided into cells. All that is needed then is to place a supervisor in a central tower and to shut up in each cell a madman, a patient, a condemned man, a worker, or a schoolboy." So again, you just replace the cells on the periphery with various people. So again, it's sort of teasing out that last quote, the panopticon situations / subjects of surveillance. You'd have the prison situation, The subject would be a condemned man. You have the sanatorium situation. The subject would be a madman. The hospital situation, patient would be the subject. Workplace situation, worker would be the subject. Learning institution situation, a schoolboy or schoolgirl would be the subject. Or, even at post-secondary, it would be the student, depending on the way you teach, I guess. The Panopticon impact, it was originally a tool for surveilling prisoners, but has been reconceptualized more broadly and more pervasively. I think for the most part, unfortunately. In part 3, I'm going to talk about George Orwell's governmental surveillance of citizens. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have read or know of Big Brother, but just to make sure, the character comes from Orwell's 1949 novel, 1984. He was a totalitarian leader of the book's fictional state. He leads an overly intrusive, controlling government. People are watching, controlled by Big Brother. They are reminded frequently that Big Brother is watching you. And here's our sort of a image of a poster. What a scary looking fella. You all know about that, so I'm going to sort of talk about maybe an inversion of this from Walter Kern, where he inverts government surveillance to self-surveillance. He talks about Little Brother, and he wrote this article in the aftermath of the Tyler Clementi tragedy. He was a Rutgers University freshman whose sex life was surveilled by a roommate through. He sort of commandeered the camera function of Clementi's computer, and was able to surveil him with some other peers. And Clementi, unfortunately, later committed suicide. Here's a quote: "It isn't some stern and monolithic Big Brother that we have to reckon with as we go about our daily lives. It's a vast cohort of prankish little brothers, and the little brothers in this case would be like your peers, your family, your friends, etc. Maybe please guess." There's a quote here: "What percentage of internet users say they worry about how much information is available online about them?" Do you have a quick guess? It is 33% in 2010, but as you know, various data breaches across different corporations and governments, etc., I'm sure that number is much higher. The invasion of privacy, of others' privacy, but also our own, as we turn our lenses on ourselves in the quest for attention by any means, has been democratized. From this, are you worried about your privacy invaded more by the government, corporations, or your peers? Maybe think about that for a second. I don't think there's really a right answer for this, but depending on if you live in an authoritarian or a democratic society, you might think it's government. In most countries, in late capitalism, corporations have such a dually outsized influence that I'm sure a lot of you might be worried about corporations. And then finally, say if you're a young person and you have nosy friends in high school, or you have parents that are a little bit overbearing, your peers, your family, etc., might be who you're most worried about in terms of invading your privacy on a day-to-day basis. Finally, I'm going to talk about the surveillance implications for education, sort of tie this all together. It's pretty, I'm sure all of you would agree to this. We're monitored constantly in a surveillance society where, anywhere you go, if especially in a major city, there's cameras everywhere. We walk around with our phones, we use our laptops with microphones and cameras on them, et cetera, et cetera. We have we carry around devices that surveil us, and there's fixed surveillance devices all over society. Schools, on a similar note, are increasingly places where students are watched by a variety of actors. As of, for one example, CCTV cameras. As of 2018, there are 93.6% of U.S. high schools, which is an astounding number. You can be tracked, obviously, through your computer or your device use. There are security officers in halls and at doorways that watch the students, and then just rank and file staff, teachers and men who patrol schools looking for student malfeasance and trying to quell it. From this, you might want to consider the extent surveillance technology impacts learning environments and the broader social control they exert, because it's not just on the students. I think it infects and impacts all of us. Finally, I'll leave you some questions to sort of ponder as you walk on your merry way. Are schools civil panopticons? Like, do they work in terms of the way Bentham was saying in terms of surveillance? If so, if you do believe that, do they spread education? How do they do that? Is CCTV video a benevolent panoptic tool? How about computers? Are they a form of panoptic tool? How about smartphones? What about school security officers? And finally, from this constant student surveillance, are we promoting inter-surveillance between them? Such as the Tyler Clementi case where, again, students are surveilling one another. That was You Can Run, But You Can't Hide: The Impact of Surveillance Technology in Schools. Thanks for listening.